To celebrate hitting 1,000 subscribers, I want to give back to everyone who supported the channel and to all the Powerscalers out there. So as a gift, I'm dropping a full video on the Mother series and its characters to show just how broken this verse really is. Let's get into it. This video is going to explain quite a lot of things, so here's a full list as well as timestamps to find certain information that you're looking for. Now, one last thing before we begin, if you have any disagreements on anything mentioned, my Discord is on screen and we can discuss it. Now, without further ado, I do hope you enjoy the video. Alright, let's start with the cosmology. EarthBound runs on many worlds interpretations. The gap widens further as you go further along with entail superposition. Many worlds interpretation is solely based on superposition, which determines on wave function, because it depends on wave functions to determine the outcome of a superposition. Parallel versions of polar exist indifferently to each other, both having similar situation with different functionality. Definitive examples of this is a superposition, which is the superposition principle, also known as superposition property, states that for all linear systems, the net response caused by two or more stimuli is the sum of responses that would have been caused by each stimulus individually. So that if input A produces response X and input B produces response Y, then input A plus B produces response X plus Y. This can also be taken by just statement of the gap widening further the more this goes on. The non-classical nature of the superposition process is brought out clearly if we consider the superposition principle of two states, A and B, such that there exists an observation which, when made on the system in state A, is certain to lead to one particular result, A say, and when made on the system in state B, is certain to lead to some different result, B say. What will be the result of the observation when made on the system in a superposed state? The answer is that the result will sometimes be A and sometimes B, according to a probability law depending on the relative weights of A and B in the superposition process. It will never be different from both A and B, i.e. either A or B. The intermediate character of the state formed by superposition thus expresses itself through the probability of a particular result for an observation being intermediate between the corresponding probabilities for the original states, not through the result itself being intermediate between the corresponding results for the original states. Why this should be high hyper? Because a general superposition, the same argument coming from the same page, a function that satisfies the superposition principle is called a linear function. Superposition can be defined by two simpler properties, additivity and homogeneity, for a scalar. A scalar is an element of a field which is used to define a vector space. In linear algebra, real numbers or generally elements of a field are called scalars and relate to vectors in an associated vector space through the operation of scalar multiplication, defined in the vector space, in which a vector can be multiplied by a scalar in the defined way to produce another vector. Generally speaking, a vector space may be defined by using any field instead of real numbers, such as complex numbers. Then scalars of that vector space will be elements of the associated field, such as complex numbers. Thus, EarthBound is high hyper, or infinite dimensional. Now that we have established that, we can talk about how characters in Mother scale to it. So giygas was threatening the full cosmology. He is described as a universal cosmic destroyer, and the parallel worlds have merged into one, so giygas would realistically be destroying those too. We know they're merged because of how Jeff describes them, and that Ness can walk to a different part of town and come back and the receptionist wouldn't recognize him, even though he checked in earlier. This is supported by the fact that Ness goes through several throughout the chapter. So giygas was threatening the full cosmology and Ness, as well as the Chosen Four would all scale to him, as they're all capable of tanking giygas' attacks as well as harming him. We can look over giygas again later, but for now let's focus on our main protagonist, Ness. We already have scaled him to the cosmology by scaling off giygas, so that puts his attack potency around high hyperversal or infinite dimensional. Now for speed, we're going to talk about a few different speed scales, such as pre-Magikarp Ness going subsonic in this calc that's on screen, where he picks up a Franklin badge and gets to it to reflect lightning before it strikes. Pre-Magikarp Ness has a measurable speed though. It's stated that giygas and his army is beyond space-time, and that's where his evil stronghold is, meaning that Ness fighting aliens and robotic enemies sent by Giygas would grant him immeasurable speed, and this would also put Ness post the Starman Jr. fight at immeasurable speed, because he's capable of dodging and reacting to the Starman's attacks. Now for the argument I like to use the most. So at the end of EarthBound, after Giygas is defeated, Ness and his friends' souls travel from the past to the present with sheer speed, which would grant immeasurable speed. By the way, the Chosen Four didn't know that they were fast before the Giygas fight, which is why they used the time machine to get to the past. And one last speed scale, the Dali's clock fight, Ness is capable of moving when the clock stops time, which would be inaccessible speed. Ness has some pretty insane hacks that are pretty good. So let's start off with Victory Inducement, where Ness can instantly win a fight against a foe if he outscales them. By the way, game mechanics are canon, because if the developer is canon, then they'd have to design the game mechanics, thus it's part of the narrative. Immortality type 2 via the fact that he won't die instantly from big explosions or taking mortal damage in the fight. Immortality type 6 via the fact that Ness's soul returns back to his body at the end of EarthBound. Immortality type 7 negation via the fact that he can kill zombies and ghosts. A casualty, I think? A casualty type 1, despite traveling back in time to fight Giygas whilst also changing the past, he suffered no change in the present time. Everyone remembers the changes, so they also have a casualty type 1. A casualty type 5 via just existing on a dimensional plane beyond space-time, in the dimension where he fought Giygas. This would also give Giygas type 5 a casualty. Low godly regen via the fact that when you die, unlike the other Chosen Four, Ness doesn't turn into a soulless being, and he can do this with the fucking hospitals. Mid godly regen via the soul consuming flame and can regenerate dying from that. Reflection with the M hat, meaning that Ness can revert attacks back. He also has passive hacks, which basically means he can move command on instinct, and can even control himself during a fight. And finally, dimensional travel, which will be good for escaping things like battlefield removal. Alright, now that I've explained most of Ness's hacks, we're going to go into some of his greatest, which will be fate manipulation, immunity negation, and conceptual manipulation. But I'll need to go into depth with each, so let's start with conceptual manipulation. Ness became the universe itself, his fate merging with the fate of the universe, becoming one and the same, meaning he now embodies fate itself. This means he has concept embodiment, via the fact that he embodies fate itself. And since it's an application for conceptual manipulation, it applies for it. And to further back this up, Ness created Magicant. Therefore, Ness created the concept/idea of kindness, sorrow, and hatred, due to the fact that Magicant contains the concepts of those emotions. Magicants are universes, and that's how we know Magicant isn't an imagination within his mind. Ness absorbed Magicant itself, therefore he absorbed the idea/concept of the emotions I mentioned. Therefore, he has concept absorption, concept creation, which are also applications for conceptual manipulation. In Mother 2, it is explicitly mentioned that Ness is a child tied to the prophecy where Giygas would be defeated. He was predetermined to fulfill his mission to defeat Giygas until the moment where he meets him. But Porky mentions that Giygas was able to change the prophecy of the Apple of Enlightenment, that is, the object that predicted everything. This is just fate hacks for Ness pre-Magicant. Now if we talk about Ness post-Magicant, then he has an immensely bigger fate hacks. Since it's directly mentioned that Ness is the literal embodiment of the universe itself in EarthBound. And it is repeatedly mentioned that the fate of the universe is linked with Ness's own fate, and would overlap with every part of the universe and its fate. It is even said that Ness's destiny is part of a system of the prophecy that BuzzBuzz spoke of, and that Ness would now be merged with this system. This would be passive fate manipulation for Ness. And lastly, Ness can be argued for passive probability manipulation, as he was able to create a 1% chance to defeat Giygas through his courage, which makes for sense to what I mentioned earlier. Fate manipulation in the vast majority of cases is a somewhat useless hacks against characters who transcend space-time / the past, present, future. But Ness's passive destiny manipulation is truly special for one thing. It is able to affect timeless beings like Giygas, and Porky, and negate the prophecy that Giygas changed in order to win in battle. Ness's fate hacks could literally affect an acasual being that's completely above space-time, oh my god, I keep fucking which means that Ness's fate manip works differently than the regular hacks. and it's more broken. That also gives coherence to his possibility manip, since Ness's Phaehax is something that goes beyond the passage of time, and all of his points for the feat I mentioned, although they defeated Giygas by praying, the prophecy said that they were going to lose, and is said that Ness had to merge with the system and power of the earth to survive Giygas. So yes, it was Ness who managed to make them win. And finally, because Ness's fate manipulation functions on a plane beyond space-time, it can kill Giygas, someone who resides beyond space-time. This would give Ness immunity negation, his third best hacks. Those are all of Ness's hacks. Now we can move on to Ninten. Ninten is pretty fodder if I'm being honest, at least inverse. He doesn't scale to the cosmology because Giygas wasn't originally threatening the cosmology but humanity. With that being said, Ninten has still some okay scaling. He has an ability called 4D Slip, which would give him 4D AP. Because Giygas already did the feat of transcending space-time, he'd also have immeasurable speed via scaling to Giygas and Mother 1. You can also argue that transcending space-time would also be 4D, so you can also argue Ninten's 4D that way. He has no good hacks aside from being able to like heal, but overall pretty weak to the standards of characters in this series. Though he did tank like a huge explosion from the robots that fought in the game, but those are yet to be calculated. We have been through Ness and Ninten, now let's go over our final character, Lucas. Lucas has a few placements. Lucas has a high uni feat, with the Dark Dragon being stated to have unlimited, so infinite, power. Lucas being one of the two people who can pull the dragon and awaken it would give him scaling to the dragon, who is also capable of resetting the entire universe. And lastly, Lucas's final placement would also be, high hyper, because he scales to Porky, who would scale to a post-Magicant Ness, who by that point would have scaling to Giygas. This would also put his speed at immeasurable too, because he can react and tag Porky. Now, as for hacks, like Ninten, he doesn't really have anything that good. He does have offense and defense buff, as well as like counters and healings. And like an arguable wish manipulation, but that's kind of like ratty. Now that we have gone through the protagonists of the series, I'm going to move back to Ness and explain his intelligence. The Sea of Eden is found in Magicant and is said to contain ultimate intelligence. Ultimate synonymous for highest or greatest. Ness absorbs Magicant, which includes the Sea of Eden, meaning Ness absorbed all of its intelligence into himself, which would put him at omniscient. Like, deadass omniscient. Now for other feats of other characters, as well as Ness himself, we have stuff like Jeff building his own rockets, and like being incredibly good in science to even know stuff like many worlds interpretation and distortion in space-time continuum, and like the space-time continuum, I can't speak. And the fourth dimension, Porky being able to successfully build his own time machine that let him travel through space-time and dimensions, Jeff's father successfully building the absolutely safe capsule that was considered safe enough to survive the sun exploding, and the power of the dragon itself, one with unlimited power. Other things like the phase distorter that let Ness and gang travel through the past like robots. Ness being able to free Paula from being sacrificed, and being able to do business at such a young age for Porky, who even built his own empire in the Mother 3 universe. Like, all that sums it up. Really quick, I'd like to go over the manga canonicity, because I know that will be a point of contention when it comes to the many worlds interpretation scale, at least. In the manga, when Ness wakes up in Pooh's palace or Dalam, Pooh's master talks about Ness and his adventures so far, and how Ness is not using everything he can utilize to the best of his abilities. He says, and I quote, "Did you read the instructions manual? The instructions manual is in the canon player's guide, which implies the game and the manga are in the same continuity, because the player's guide is a referencing as Ness can use in the manga, which is also something he can use in the game." Okay, so we've gone through everything in the Mother series, from protagonist scalings to hacks and speeds. Sorry this took so long to get out, I lost motivation heavily while working on the script. So now that I have everything made, the official Ness CSAT page will be worked on for like basically everyone who wants to use it, and that'll be out soon. I'll post updates on that. And for some future projects I'm working about, I'm thinking about sort of making a part 2 video where I go over the writing of the games and the characters, so let me know if you'd like to see that. I'll also get the last video of the Smash Bros GSP Ness thing, remember that? out as soon as I can. I just haven't been bothered to record the footage, but I'll get to it. Aside from that, I'd like to announce that I'll be uploading way less in a few weeks because I have exams and I'll need to be studying hard for them, so sorry if consistency is lacking. With that, I hope you enjoyed this again. And once again, if you have any disagreements, my Discord is in bio. We can run a discussion or a debate. Now with that, thanks for watching. Peace.